It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, but a single, unexpected scream shattered everything in seconds. What you're about to see is unbelievable. Get ready. This ceremony will never be forgotten. Subscribe and find out how it all fell apart. The Ashford estate gleamed under the perfect May sunshine, its manicured lawns and colonial architecture providing the ideal backdrop for what Newport, Rhode Island's social circles had deemed the wedding of the year. White roses and lilies adorned every conceivable surface, their sweetness hanging heavily in the warm spring air. A string quartet played softly in the garden, where 200 guests, dressed in their finest attire, mingled with practiced smiles and careful conversation. 23-year-old Ethan Mitchell adjusted his bow tie uncomfortably as he observed the scene from the periphery. As the cousin of the bride, Caroline Winthrop, he had been reluctantly dragged to every pre-wedding event over the past 6 months. Unlike the others in his family, Ethan had always possessed an uncanny ability to see what lay beneath social veneers. A recent psychology graduate from Brown University, he found himself analyzing behavior professionally now, not just as the family oddity who noticed too much. "There you are," said a familiar voice. Ethan's sister Rebecca approached with 2 champagne flutes. "Mom's looking for you. The photographer wants the family shots in 10 minutes. Ethan accepted the drink, his eyes still scanning the crowd. "Have you noticed anything strange about Uncle Richard today?" Rebecca rolled her eyes. "Here we go again with your amateur psychoanalysis. Can't you just enjoy a wedding like a normal person?" "I'm serious. He's been shuffling papers with Caroline's fiancé for the past 20 minutes, and they both look like they're about to have panic attacks. It's called pre-wedding jitters, Ethan. Plus, the Harrisons are investing in Dad and Uncle Richard's development project. It's probably just business." Ethan watched as Caroline's fiancé, the dashingly handsome and impossibly wealthy James Harrison III, excused himself from Richard Winthrop and disappeared into the mansion. James's face had been a mask of restrained tension, not the expression of a man hours away from marrying the supposed love of his life. "Something's off about this whole thing," Ethan murmured. Rebecca sighed. "Not everyone has a dark secret, little brother. The Harrisons are practically American royalty. Caroline's been in love with James since their first summer in the Hamptons, and our family is about to become connected to one of the most influential dynasties in New England. Try to appreciate the fairy tale." But fairy tales had never interested Ethan. While his family had spent months obsessing over flower arrangements and seating charts, he had been watching the subtle shifts in dynamics between the two families. The way Caroline's smile never quite reached her eyes when James's mother, Margaret Harrison, spoke about their future. The hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when certain people entered rooms, the frequent intense phone calls James took in private. As the guests began moving toward the ceremony area, an elaborate arrangement of white chairs facing a flower-covered arch overlooking Narragansett Bay, Ethan caught sight of Emma Walsh, James's cousin, hurrying from the direction of the bridal suite. Her expression was troubled, and she clutched her phone tightly. When she spotted Ethan looking at her, she quickly composed her features and changed direction. "Ethan! Rebecca! Time for family photos," called their mother, Elizabeth Mitchell, waving frantically from the terrace. The photography session was a study in choreographed perfection. Caroline looked stunning in her designer gown, her blonde hair arranged in an elegant updo adorned with tiny white flowers. Her parents, Richard and Victoria Winthrop, beamed proudly, every inch the picture of upper-class contentment. Yet Ethan noticed the slight tremble in his cousin's hands, the way she kept glancing toward the mansion rather than at her soon-to-be husband. During a brief moment alone with Caroline, Ethan decided to probe gently. "You okay, Care? You seem a little on edge." Caroline's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Just wedding day nerves, nothing to worry about." You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Even now, minutes before the ceremony. Something flickered in Caroline's eyes, fear, regret, but it was quickly smothered. Everything's perfect, Ethan, exactly as it should be. Her voice had an almost rehearsed quality to it. Before he could press further, Victoria swooped in and whisked her daughter away for final preparations. As guests took their seats for the key ceremony, Ethan noticed Emma Walsh again, this time in an intense whispered conversation with James's younger brother, Matthew. Their gestures were emphatic, their expressions serious. When James approached them, they immediately separated, plastering smiles on their faces that did nothing to disguise their discomfort. Ethan found himself seated next to his grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, the family matriarch known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. At 82, she was perhaps the only person in the family who appreciated Ethan's perceptiveness. "You're watching them like a hawk, my boy," she whispered as the music began to swell, signaling the start of the procession. "Something's wrong, Grandma. I can feel it." Eleanor patted his hand. "The Harrisons have always been better at appearances than substance. I knew James's grandfather back in the day. The whole family is built on carefully constructed facades." "What do you mean?" But Eleanor simply shook her head as the bridesmaids began their procession. "Just remember, Ethan, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is speak the truth, even when everyone else is committed to the lie." The ceremony proceeded with picture-perfect precision. James stood at the altar, golden sunlight highlighting his strong jaw and perfectly coiffed dark hair, the very image of the handsome groom. When Caroline appeared on her father's arm, a collective sigh of appreciation rippled through the gathering. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching an elaborate performance rather than a genuine celebration of love. Halfway through the efficient speech about commitment and honesty, Ethan noticed a server discreetly approach James's father, Charles Harrison, and whisper something that caused the older man's face to drain of color. Charles immediately motioned to Margaret, who excused herself with practiced poise and followed him into the mansion. Minutes later, Ethan saw Emma Walsh receive a text that made her eyes widen in alarm. The ceremony continued, but a subtle current of tension had begun to flow beneath the surface of the event. James's answers came a beat too late. Richard Winthrop kept checking his watch. Victoria's smile had frozen into a grimace. As the officiant reached the pivotal moment, "If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Ethan felt a strange weight settle in his chest. The traditional phrase, usually nothing more than a ceremonial formality, suddenly seemed loaded with significance. Around him, the assembled guests sat in polite silence. The perfect couple stood before them, ready to embark on their perfect life together. Everything was proceeding according to plan, just as the two prominent families had meticulously arranged over the past year. Yet beneath it all, Ethan sensed the trembling foundation of secrets about to collapse. The officiant nodded, satisfied with the silence, and moved to continue. In that moment, Ethan caught Caroline's eye. For a split second, the mask slipped, and he saw something there that chilled him, a silent plea, a desperate hope that someone, anyone, would save her from the beautiful lie she was living. The words formed in Ethan's throat before he could fully process what he was about to do. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is speak the truth. As the officiant began to pronounce James and Caroline husband and wife, Ethan felt himself rising to his feet, his heart pounding in his ears. The faces of 200 guests turned toward him in shock. His family stared in horror. Caroline looked at him with an expression that mingled terror and relief. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ceremony. "But I can't let this happen." Time seemed to freeze as Ethan's words hung in the air. 200. pairs of eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. His mother's face had turned ashen. His father looked ready to physically remove him from the premises, and Rebecca was shaking her head in disbelief. "Young man," the officiant began, "unless you have a legal objection." "I do," Ethan said, his voice growing stronger despite the trembling in his knees. "This marriage is built on lies." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Charles Harrison stepped forward, his commanding presence honed by decades as CEO of Harrison Financial Group. "This is outrageous. Richard, control your nephew." Richard. Winthrop looked torn between family loyalty and his business relationship with the Harrisons. "Ethan, this isn't the time or place for whatever you think you know." But Ethan's eyes remained fixed on Caroline and James. James had gone rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched visibly in his cheek. Caroline, however, had begun to tremble slightly, her bouquet of white roses quivering in her grasp. "Caroline," Ethan said gently, "you don't have to go through with this." "That's enough!" Victoria shrieked, moving to stand protectively beside her daughter. "Security, remove him immediately." Two men in dark suits began making their way toward Ethan, but Eleanor Mitchell rose to her feet with surprising agility for her age, placing a gnarled hand on her grandson's arm. "Before you drag my grandson away," she announced in a voice that commanded attention, "perhaps we should hear what he has to say. After all, the Mitchells and Winthrops have never been the sort of families to prioritize appearances over truth." Her pointed gaze at the Harrisons made it clear what she thought of them. A murmur of uncertainty spread through the guests. The two security guards hesitated, looking to Charles Harrison for direction. James finally broke his silence. "Let him speak." His voice was controlled, but Ethan detected the undercurrent of fear. "I have nothing to hide." The tension was palpable. As Ethan stepped into the central aisle, he hadn't planned this moment, had never imagined himself disrupting his cousin's wedding, but the pieces had been falling into place all day, and he couldn't ignore what he'd observed. "For the past 6 months," Ethan began, "I've watched Caroline change. The cousin who once spoke her mind freely became increasingly reserved. The woman who was known for her independence suddenly began deferring to James on everything from their honeymoon destination to the color of their future living room curtains. People in love compromise," Margaret Harrison interjected smoothly. "It's hardly cause for a spectacle." "Compromise is mutual," Ethan countered, "but that's not what I've been seeing. What I've seen is Caroline being gradually molded to fit the Harrison family image while slowly disconnecting from everyone who truly knows her." Victoria scoffed. "This is ridiculous. My daughter is simply maturing and adapting to her future role." "As what?" Ethan challenged. "A trophy wife who'll be trotted out at charity galas while her husband carries on exactly as he did before marriage." James stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Caroline's waist. "I think you've said enough. Whatever issues you have with me or my family, today isn't the time to air them." "When would be a better time?" Ethan asked. "After Caroline has signed the prenuptial agreement that gives her nothing if she leaves you within 5 years, regardless of the reason. After she's cut ties with friends and family members who don't meet the Harrison standard." Caroline's head snapped up. "How do you know about the prenup terms? They're confidential." A heavy silence fell. It was the first crack in the perfect facade. Ethan softened his voice. "I overheard your father arguing with James's lawyers last week at the rehearsal dinner. The terms are unusually restrictive, Caroline. Did you even read what you signed?" Caroline's eyes darted to her father, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Of course she read it," Richard insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "Standard protections for both families' assets." "That's not all that's being protected, is it?" Ethan pressed. "Tell me, James, does Caroline know about Emma?" The reaction was immediate. Emma Walsh paled visibly, and James's brother Matthew stepped closer to her as if to shield her from what was coming. James's face hardened. "This is absurd. Emma is my cousin." "Yes, she is," Ethan agreed. "And she's also been running interference for you for years, taking calls, making excuses, covering your tracks." "You don't know what you're talking about," James snapped, but the confident demeanor was cracking. Ethan turned to Emma directly. "I saw you earlier, rushing from the bridal suite, looking upset. What did you discover, Emma? What was so important that you needed to warn James immediately?" All eyes turned to Emma, who looked trapped. For a moment she seemed about to deny everything, but then her shoulders sagged. "I can't do this anymore, James. It's gone too far." The perfect veneer of the ceremony was now thoroughly shattered. Guests began whispering among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable, others leaning forward with undisguised interest in the unfolding drama. "Emma, don't," James warned, but his cousin shook her head. "I found these in Caroline's purse when I went to bring her something borrowed." Emma reached into her clutch and pulled out an orange prescription bottle. "Anxiety medication, strong stuff, prescribed just last week. She's been having panic attacks about the wedding, James. Actual panic attacks, and you told me she was just being dramatic." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "You went through my things." "I was worried about you," Emma said, her voice gentle. "And I was right to be. You're not happy, Caroline. You haven't been for months." Victoria Winthrop rushed to her daughter's side. "Of course she's happy. This is just pre-wedding nerves. Everyone has them." "Is that why you've been secretly meeting with a therapist, Mom?" Caroline asked quietly. The second crack appeared, deeper than the first. "I saw the charges on your credit card statement when I was helping Dad with the wedding budget. Twice weekly sessions for the past 3 months. You've been just as anxious about this merger," she caught herself, "about this marriage as I have." Victoria recoiled as if slapped. That's private." "Nothing's private in the world we're creating here," Caroline said, her voice gaining strength. "Isn't that right, Dad? Isn't that why you agreed to the Harrison investment terms? To keep our family's financial problems from becoming public?" Richard turned a mottled shade of red. "Caroline, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," Caroline interrupted. "The Winthrop name isn't enough anymore. We need Harrison money to maintain the illusion that nothing has changed." She turned to James. "And you need my family's social connections and historical prestige to soften your family's reputation as ruthless new money." James's expression hardened. "That's an oversimplification." "Is it?" Ethan interjected. "Or is it the uncomfortable truth? This isn't a love match. It's a business merger with vows." Charles Harrison had heard enough. "This charade has gone on long enough, James. We're leaving." But James remained rooted in place, his eyes locked on Caroline's. For the first time that day, they seemed to be truly seeing each other. "There's more, isn't there?" Caroline asked softly. "Emma's been trying to tell me something for weeks, but she never quite gets the words out." The tension in the air was suffocating. Matthew Harrison stepped forward, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Tell her, James, or I will." James shrugged off his brother's hand. "There's nothing to tell." "Alexandra Morgan," Matthew said simply. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several guests gasped, clearly recognizing it. Margaret Harrison closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Who is Alexandra Morgan?" Caroline asked, though something in her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. "She's a real estate agent from Boston," Emma explained when no one else would. "She and James have been seeing each other on and off for 3 years." Caroline took a step back, her wedding dress rustling against the flower petals scattered on the ground. 3 years. We've been together for 2. "Like I said," Emma continued, her voice gentle but firm, "on and off. They broke up when he started dating you, but 6 months ago." When we got engaged, Caroline supplied, her voice hollow. Emma nodded. They reconnected. James swore it was just closure, but it wasn't, Matthew finished. They've been meeting regularly. The business trips to Boston, the late-night conference calls. Not all of them were for Harrison Financial. James finally found his voice. It's not what you think, Caroline. Alexandra and I have history, yes, but it's complicated. Complicated, Caroline repeated, the word dripping with newfound disdain. Like the prenup that prevents me from leaving you without losing everything. Like the fact that you insisted I give up my job at the museum to focus on being your wife. Like the fact that you've been planning our entire life together without actually including me in any of the decisions. The perfect image of their union was now completely destroyed, replaced by the stark reality of what lay beneath. Around them, the beautiful decorations seemed gaudy and artificial in the harsh light of truth. Charles Harrison stepped forward, abandoning any pretense of maintaining the ceremony. This is a private family matter. I must ask our guests to leave us to resolve this situation. But it was too late. The carefully controlled narrative had splintered into 100 jagged pieces, each one reflecting a different facet of the truth that had been so meticulously hidden beneath layers of social expectations and family pressures. As the murmurs among the guests grew louder, Carolyn turned to face her family, the Harrisons, and the assembled crowd. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her voice was strong when she finally spoke. I think, she said clearly, that there won't be a wedding today. Caroline's declaration hung in the air like crystal shards, beautiful in their clarity, but dangerous in their sharpness. The assembled guests began to stir, unsure whether to leave as Charles Harrison had suggested or stay to witness the extraordinary unraveling of what had been billed as the social event of the season. Please, Victoria Winthrop implored, her social training kicking in despite her obvious distress. Let's continue this discussion privately. There's no need to... No more hiding, Caroline interrupted, her voice steadier than it had been in months. She carefully removed the diamond ring from her finger. 6 carats, custom designed and worth more than most people's homes, and held it out to James. I think you should give this to Alexandra. I'm sure she's been waiting long enough. James made no move to take the ring. Caroline, you're upset. We should talk about this rationally, away from... He gestured vaguely at the crowd. I've been rational for 2 years, Caroline replied. I've been the perfect girlfriend, the perfect fiancée, following all the rules of engagement for our social class. But I'm done performing. Eleanor Mitchell gave a small, satisfied nod from her seat in the front row. The girls finally found her backbone. About time. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the guests. Charles Harrison's face darkened with anger. This is precisely why these matters should be handled privately. The Winthrops clearly have no concept of discretion. Richard Winthrop bristled. My family has been a pillar of Newport society for 5 generations. Don't lecture me about discretion, Charles. 5 generations of spending money you haven't earned in decades, Charles shot back. Let's not pretend this match wasn't as beneficial to you as it was to us. The 2 patriarchs squared off, decades of simmering class resentment bubbling. To the surface, new money versus old name, the classic American tension laid bare for all to see. Dad, stop, Caroline said firmly. This isn't helping. But the dam had broken. Years of carefully maintained appearances were washing away, in a flood of raw emotion and suppressed truths. Do you know what your father did to secure our investment? Charles asked Caroline, ignoring his wife's attempt to quiet him. He leveraged your family's historical estate, the one that's been in the Winthrop family for generations. If this marriage, didn't go through, the banks would call in their loans within 6 months. Caroline turned to her father, shock evident on her face. Is that true? You mortgaged Winthrop House? Richard couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. The financial crisis hit our investments harder than I let on. The estate's upkeep alone costs millions each year. So I was the collateral, Caroline said, realization dawning. The final asset to be leveraged. Victoria tried to intervene. It wasn't like that, sweetheart. We always wanted you to marry well, to be taken care of. To be taken care of, Caroline repeated hollowly, like a child or a possession. Ethan watched this exchange with a mixture of vindication and sadness. He had suspected financial motivations, but even he hadn't realized the depth of the entanglement between the families. And you, Caroline continued, turning to James, was any of it real, or was I just part of the deal from the beginning? For the first time, James looked genuinely conflicted. It wasn't that simple, Caroline. I do care for you. Just not enough to stop seeing Alexandra, Caroline pointed out. Not enough to create a marriage based on honesty. Margaret Harrison finally broke her silence. James has certain expectations placed on him as the Harrison heir. The merger with your family's interests made financial sense, but we always hoped genuine affection would follow. Affection, Caroline echoed. Not love, not passion, just sufficient affection to produce the next generation of Harrisons with a suitable pedigree. The brutal honesty of Caroline's assessment caused several guests to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The raw emotion on display was anathema to their social conditioning, where feelings were meant to be managed, not exposed. Emma stepped forward, placing herself between the warring families. This has gone far enough. We're hurting each other. Needlessly. No, Emma, Ethan countered. For the first time, everyone is speaking honestly. That's never needless. Emma turned to him, exasperation clear on her face. And what about you, Ethan? What's your role in all this? Family crusader? Truth teller? Or are you just enjoying watching everything burn? The question caught Ethan off guard. He had been so focused on exposing the lies surrounding the wedding that he hadn't fully considered his own motivations. I couldn't stand by and watch Caroline sacrifice her life for a lie, he finally said. Not when I could see she was drowning in all this. How noble, James remarked sarcastically, and it has nothing to do with the fact that you've been in love with her since you were teenagers. A hush fell over the gathering. Caroline looked at Ethan with new eyes, searching his face for confirmation. That's not what this is about, Ethan insisted, though he could feel heat rising to his cheeks. Isn't it? James pressed. Everyone has ulterior motives, Ethan, even self-appointed moral guardians like you. The accusation struck closer to home than Ethan wanted to admit. Had his feelings for Caroline colored his perception? Had he been too eager to find fault with James, with the whole arrangement? Rebecca came to stand beside her brother. Leave him alone. Whatever his reasons, Ethan was the only one with enough courage to speak the truth when everyone else was content to live with the lie. Such admirable family loyalty, Charles Harrison sneered. But I wonder how loyal you'll all be when the Winthrop fortune finally dries up completely. When Winthrop House is sold off to developers, when you're no longer invited to the right parties or included on the right boards. Richard Winthrop paled visibly. You wouldn't. Oh, but I would, Charles replied. Our investment offer had a sunset clause. If the marriage doesn't proceed, we're free to withdraw all funding and call in our existing loans immediately. The naked threat hung in the air. For many of the guests who moved in the same financial and social circles, this was the most shocking revelation yet. Not the infidelity or the emotional manipulation, but the bare-knuckled business tactics applied to what should have been a personal relationship. Caroline looked around at the beautiful setting that now seemed like an elaborate stage set. The flowers, the music, the champagne, all of it, designed to disguise the commercial transaction at the heart of the day. So that's it, she said quietly. If I don't marry James, my family loses everything. Victoria reached for her daughter's hand. No one is forcing you, Caroline. We'll find another way. But Richard's expression said otherwise. Decades of financial mismanagement had led them to this precipice, and Caroline was their last hope of avoiding the fall. Matthew Harrison, who had remained mostly silent, suddenly spoke up. This is absurd. We're not living in the 19th century. He turned to his father. Call off the dogs, Dad. This strong-arm approach might work in corporate takeovers, but not with family. Charles shot his younger son a withering look. Stay out of matters you don't understand, Matthew. You've never had the stomach for doing what's necessary. What's necessary? Matthew repeated incredulously. Forcing a woman to marry my brother against her will? Threatening her family with financial ruin? When did we become the villains in a Victorian novel? The confrontation between father and son added yet another layer to the public disintegration of the carefully maintained Harrison image. Guests who had come expecting champagne and cake were instead witnessing the collapse of two prominent families' facades. Emma moved to Caroline's side. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. The Harrison name doesn't give them the right to dictate your life. James stared at his cousin in disbelief. You're taking her side, after everything our family has done for you. I'm taking the side of a basic human decency, Emma replied evenly, something that seems to be in short supply around here today. The lines were being drawn, alliances shifting and reforming as the hidden truths continued to emerge. What had begun as Ethan's lone stand was evolving into something larger, a fundamental questioning of the values and assumptions that had governed both families for generations. Caroline squared her shoulders, the weight of the moment visible in her posture. I need some time to think, to decide what I want, not what everyone else wants for me. There's nothing to decide, Charles Harrison insisted. The contracts are signed, the arrangements are made. I'm not a corporate merger, Caroline shot back. I'm a human being, and I'm done being a pawn in whatever game you and my father have been playing. She gathered her elaborate skirts and began walking back down the aisle, away from the altar, away from James, away from the path that had been laid out for her with such precision and calculation. Victoria called after her, Caroline, please. But Caroline kept walking, her steps growing more confident with each passing moment. When she reached Ethan, she paused briefly. Thank you, she said simply, before continuing her exit from the ceremony. James moved to follow her, but Matthew placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. Let her go. You've done enough damage for one day. The picture-perfect wedding had transformed into something no one could have anticipated, a public reckoning, a moment of truth that had laid bare the complex web of motivations, desires, and deceptions that had brought them all to this point. As Caroline disappeared into the mansion, the assembled guests began to murmur more loudly, the pretense of decorum finally abandoned completely. Some were already reaching for their phones, eager to share the dramatic turn of events with absent friends. Others looked genuinely distressed, perhaps recognizing uncomfortable parallels to their own lives and choices. Eleanor Mitchell made her way to Ethan's side, leaning heavily on her cane. Well done, my boy, she said quietly. It takes courage to shatter an illusion, especially one so beautifully constructed. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, Ethan admitted. Not so publicly, not with so much at stake. His grandmother's eyes were kind but knowing. Truth rarely emerges in comfortable ways, but better a painful truth than a comfortable lie, wouldn't you say? Before Ethan could respond, Charles Harrison approached them, his expression thunderous. I hope you're satisfied, young man. You've potentially destroyed two families today with your self-righteous meddling. Ethan met the older man's gaze steadily. No, Mr. Harrison. If anything is destroyed today, it's the fiction that marriage is. can be arranged like business deals, with people treated as assets to be acquired or liquidated. Charles's face flushed with anger. You naive fool. That's exactly what marriage has always been among families like ours. The pretty sentiments are just window dressing for the practical reality. Maybe it's time for that to change, Ethan suggested quietly. Charles laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Your generation thinks you've invented morality, that you're the first to question the systems that have maintained order and prosperity for centuries. But when your high-minded ideals leave you without the comforts and privileges you've taken for granted, we'll see how quickly those principles dissolve. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Ashford estate grounds. The elaborate wedding that should have been in full celebratory swing by now had instead dissolved into small clusters of people engaged in intense conversation. Many guests had already departed, sensing that the remainder of the evening would not include the lavish reception they'd anticipated. The catering staff stood awkwardly near tables laden with untouched food, uncertain whether to continue their service or begin packing away the 7-tier wedding cake that would never be cut. Inside the mansion's library, Caroline sat alone, still in her wedding gown, staring out at the ocean view that had made this venue so desirable. The dress, with its hundreds of hand-sewn pearls and custom Italian lace, suddenly felt heavy and constricting, like armor she no longer needed to wear. The late afternoon light caught the diamond ring still on her finger, sending prisms of color dancing across the antique mahogany desk. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. If it's anyone named Harrison or Winthrop, I'm not available, she called out, her voice steadier than she had expected. It's Emma, came the reply, and Rebecca Mitchell. Caroline hesitated, then sighed. Come in. The two women entered cautiously. Rebecca carried a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses, her expression a mixture of concern and cautious relief. We thought you might need this more than the reception guests, she explained, setting the glasses on a side table and filling each one with the golden liquid. Emma looked around the opulent room, her expression troubled. She had removed her bridesmaid's shoes, and her hair was coming loose from its elaborate updo. I should have told you about Alexandra months ago. I'm so sorry, Caroline. I convinced myself it was loyalty to family, but really, it was cowardice. Caroline accepted the glass Rebecca offered her, the weight of it grounding her in the moment. Would I have believed you, or would I have just accused you of trying to sabotage my perfect match? We all saw what we wanted to see. We'll never know now, Emma said quietly, taking a seat across from her and smoothing her silk dress across her knees. Rebecca poured champagne for all 3 of them, the bubbles rising rapidly to the surface. To honesty, she said, raising her glass, however messy and inconvenient it might be. They drank in silence for a moment, the weight of the day's revelations settling around them like dust after an explosion. Through the open window, they could hear the murmur of remaining guests and the occasional raised voice as the aftermath continued to unfold. What will you do now? Rebecca finally asked, setting her glass down on a coaster, ever mindful of the priceless antiques surrounding them. Caroline laughed, a hollow sound that bounced off the book-lined walls. That's the question, isn't it? For the first time in years, I don't have a meticulously planned next step. No color-coded calendar mapping out my future. It's terrifying and strangely liberating. She twisted the diamond ring, but made no move to remove it yet. You know James will try to win you back, Emma warned, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. He doesn't like losing, especially not publicly. In his mind, this is just a temporary setback, a problem to be solved with. The right strategy. Is that what I am? Something to win or lose, a problem to solve. Caroline shook her head, sending a few carefully arranged curls tumbling from their pins. That's exactly the kind of thinking I need to escape. I've been a trophy, An asset, a solution to the Winthrop financial crisis. Maybe it's time I was just me. A soft knock interrupted them. Ethan's voice came through the door. Caroline, can we talk? Rebecca and Emma exchanged glances, a silent communication born of the intense experience they had just shared. We'll give you two some privacy, Rebecca said, standing and gathering her champagne glass. No, Caroline replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Stay. Whatever Ethan has to say, he can say in front of you both. She called. Out louder, come in, Ethan. Ethan entered, looking uncomfortable in his now rumpled formal wear. He'd loosened his bow tie, and his curly hair was disheveled from repeatedly running his hands through it. His eyes, usually so perceptive and confident, now held a hint of uncertainty. I wanted to apologize, he began, remaining standing near the door as if unsure of his welcome. Not for speaking up, but for how everything unfolded. I never meant to create such a public spectacle. I thought I could talk to you privately before the ceremony, but then everything started moving so quickly, and I saw you walking down the aisle looking so trapped, and I just... He trailed off, gesturing helplessly. Caroline studied him for a moment, seeing her cousin with new eyes. Was James right about your feelings for me? The directness of the question caught Ethan off guard. He glanced at Rebecca and Emma, clearly wishing for the privacy Caroline had denied him. A flush crept up his neck. This isn't about my feelings. He deflected, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It's about you not being trapped in a marriage built on lies. That's not an answer, Caroline pressed, surprising herself with her newfound boldness. Today seems to be about truth, doesn't it? All of it, not just the convenient parts. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair again. Yes, there was a time when I had feelings for you. We grew up together. We've known each other our whole lives. But that's not why I spoke up today. I would have done the same for anyone I care about, regardless of romantic feelings. His eyes met hers directly. Your happiness matters to me, Caroline. Not as a potential partner, but as family, as someone I respect. The word respect hung in the air, weighty and significant. Caroline seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. Well, either way, I owe you my gratitude, although my father might not share that sentiment. A wry smile touched her lips briefly. I'm pretty sure he's adding up the cost of this cancelled wedding down to the last canapé. Speaking of your father, Emma interjected, setting down her empty champagne glass. He and Charles Harrison are still going at it in the garden. It's getting ugly. Charles is threatening to call in all loans immediately, and your father is threatening a lawsuit for breach of contract. Let them fight, Caroline said with sudden weariness. I'm done being the solution to their problems. Let them solve their own financial mess without sacrificing their daughter on the altar of business expediency. A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. The library door burst open without a knock, and James stormed in, his perfect composure finally shattered. He was followed closely by Matthew, who appeared to be trying to restrain him, one hand on his brother's shoulder. Enough of this drama, James announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to giving orders that were obeyed without question. Caroline, we need to talk. Privately. His gaze swept dismissively over the others in the room. Caroline didn't move from her seat, though she felt a momentary urge to stand, to smooth her dress, to revert to the accommodating woman she had trained herself to be over the past 2 years. Instead, she remained seated, hands folded calmly in her lap. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my friends. James's jaw tightened, a muscle visibly jumping in his cheek. Fine. This childish tantrum has gone on long enough. Yes, there were things I should have been more honest about. Yes, I made mistakes with Alexandra, but throwing away everything we've built over one indiscretion is ridiculous. You're being impulsive and emotional. One indiscretion? Emma repeated incredulously, rising to her feet. James, you've been seeing her for months. You've taken her to the Boston house. You were with her last weekend when you claimed to be in New York for business. James shot his cousin a venomous look, his eyes cold with betrayal. Thank you for your loyalty, Emma. I won't forget it. Threatening your own family now? Matthew asked, disgusted. You really are becoming Dad's perfect clone. He moved further into the room, positioning himself subtly between James and the others, as if preparing to intervene if needed. Caroline stood, the voluminous skirts of her gown rustling like waves against the shore. James, what exactly did we build? A relationship where you make all the decisions? Where I give up my career, my independence, my voice? Where I sign away my rights in a prenuptial agreement I barely understood? Where you maintain a relationship with another woman while I plan our wedding? That's not a partnership, it's a possession. You've never wanted for anything, James snapped, a rare display of genuine emotion breaking through his polished exterior. I've given you everything, the lifestyle, the status, the security your family can no longer provide. Do you have any idea how many women would be grateful to be in your position? Accept honesty, Caroline replied quietly. Accept respect. Accept love. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. James seemed momentarily at a loss, his confident facade cracking to reveal confusion beneath. I do love you, he finally said, his voice softer. In my way. Your way, Caroline echoed, the words tasting bitter, which includes keeping Alexandra on the side, which includes controlling every aspect of my life. That's not love, James. That's ownership. Outside, the sound of raised voices grew louder. The door opened again without a knock, and Victoria entered, looking distraught. Her carefully applied makeup had begun to smear at the corners of her eyes, and her perfect chignon was coming undone. Caroline, you need to come quickly. Your father and Charles are about to come to blows, and the remaining guests are watching. Like it's a spectator sport. The Ashleys are filming it on their phones. Caroline didn't move, feeling a strange calm settle over her. Let them fight their own battles for once. Victoria stared at her daughter in shock, as if seeing a stranger. This isn't like you, Caroline. You've always been the peacemaker, the responsible one, the one who smooths things over. Maybe that's the problem, Caroline replied, reaching up to remove another hairpin, letting more of her carefully arranged curls tumble free. I've been so busy being what everyone needed me to be that I've lost sight of who I actually am. Victoria's expression softened slightly, a mother's concern breaking through the social panic. Sweetheart, I understand you're upset, but there are practical considerations. The financial arrangements— Stop, Caroline interrupted, holding up a hand. I'm not a line item in Dad's balance sheet. Find another way to save the family fortune. She paused, then added more gently, We'll figure it out, Mom, but not like this. A tense silence fell over the room. Through the large windows they could see Richard Winthrop and Charles Harrison engaged in an animated argument near the ceremony site, their respective spouses attempting to intervene without success. Around them, the once perfect floral arrangements were beginning to wilt in the late afternoon heat, a physical manifestation of the day's collapse. Matthew turned to his brother, his expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. This is what it all comes down to, isn't it? Money, status, power. Dad's been drilling it into us since we were children. Nothing else matters. He laughed bitterly. Look where it's gotten us. James's expression hardened, his momentary vulnerability vanishing beneath the familiar mask of Harrison pride. Don't pretend you're above it all, Matt. You've enjoyed the benefits of being a Harrison as much as I have. The connections, the opportunities, the doors that open at the mention of our name. Maybe I have, Matthew acknowledged with a shrug. But at least I can recognize what it's cost us, what it's done to you, to all of us. As the brothers faced, Off Eleanor Mitchell entered the library, moving slowly but purposefully with her cane. Her entrance had a gravity to it, the weight of decades of wisdom and observation embodied in her frail but determined frame. "Well, this is quite the family gathering," she observed dryly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Reminds me of the time your grandfather accused your great-uncle of embezzlement at your parents' anniversary party. James, the Harrisons have always had a flair for dramatic confrontations." James turned to the elderly woman with barely concealed impatience. "Mrs. Mitchell, with all due respect, this doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it?" Eleanor countered, raising one perfectly arched eyebrow. "When my grandson disrupts a wedding and my grandniece is at the center of a social maelstrom, I'd say it very much concerns me." She settled herself into an armchair with regal dignity, arranging her silk dress around her. Besides, someone needs to be the voice of perspective here. Caroline looked at her great-aunt with curiosity, drawn by the calm authority in her voice. "What do you mean by perspective?" Eleanor's eyes, sharp despite her advanced age, surveyed the room. "I've watched 3 generations of Newport society go through these elaborate mating rituals. Marriage is made for money, for social advancement, for family alliances. Some work out, most don't, but the ones that endure have something that can't be negotiated in prenuptial agreements or business contracts." "Love?" Rebecca suggested, offering the older woman a glass of champagne, which she accepted with a nod of thanks. "Respect," Eleanor corrected, taking a small sip. "Love comes and goes like the tide, but respect, that's the foundation that withstands the storms." She looked pointedly at James. "You can't respect someone you lie to, young man, and you can't respect yourself if you accept those lies." "This," she directed at Caroline. The wisdom of her words seemed to settle over the room like a blanket, temporarily hushing the conflict. Outside, the argument between the patriarchs had dissipated, replaced by what appeared to be a tense but more controlled conversation. "So what happens now?" Emma asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Caroline took a deep breath, the weight of decision settling in her chest. "Now I figure out who I am without all the expectations, who Caroline Winthrop is when she's not being defined as James Harrison's fiancée, or Richard Winthrop's daughter, or Newport society's perfect young heiress." "And the financial situation?" Victoria pressed anxiously, ever practical even in emotional crisis. "Will have to be solved without sacrificing me," Caroline replied firmly. She finally slipped the diamond ring from her finger and held it out. To James, "I believe this belongs to your family." James watched her with a mixture of frustration and dawning realization. "You're really ending this, aren't you?" "The wedding is off," Caroline confirmed, her voice steady. "As for what else ends or begins, that remains to be seen." James straightened his posture, the businessman in him taking over where the rejected fiancé faltered. "Then I'll have my lawyers contact yours tomorrow regarding the dissolution of our agreements." "So formal," Matthew muttered, shaking his head. "God forbid you show a human emotion." James ignored his brother, his attention fixed on Caroline. "I assume you'll want some time before we make any public statements." "Always concerned with appearances," Caroline said with a sad smile. "But yes, I'd appreciate a few days before this becomes gossip column fodder." The tension in the room had shifted from explosive to melancholy. What had been building for years, the expectations, the compromises, the small surrenders of authenticity, had finally reached its breaking point, leaving everyone to sift through the aftermath. Ethan, who had remained quiet during much of the exchange, finally spoke. "I know this isn't how anyone imagined this day would end, but maybe it's not an ending at all. Maybe it's the beginning of something more honest for all of us." Eleanor nodded approvingly at her grandson. "The boy has his moments of wisdom." 3 months later, the Ashford estate hosted another event, Smaller, less elaborate, but no less significant. The garden that had been the site of the failed wedding now held long tables adorned with wildflowers and simple lanterns. Guests mingled casually, dressed well but comfortably, the rigid formality of Newport society noticeably relaxed. At the center of it all was Caroline, laughing with genuine joy as she shared a toast with Emma, Rebecca, and Ethan. Her hair was shorter now, her style more reflective of her own taste rather than social expectations. The Winthrop house had been partially opened to the public as a historical site, generating enough income to begin addressing the family's financial troubles without sacrificing their heritage completely. James was absent, having thrown himself into expanding Harrison Financial's international presence. Alexandra Morgan was rumored to have joined him on his extended business trip to London. Matthew, however, had come, bringing with him a spirit of reconciliation and a genuine wish for Caroline's happiness. Eleanor Mitchell observed the gathering from her favorite chair, positioned to capture both the ocean view and the human drama unfolding before her. Ethan joined her, offering a glass of her preferred whiskey. "Quite a different scene from the last time we were here," she remarked, accepting the drink. Ethan nodded. "Caroline seems happy." "She's finding her way," Eleanor agreed. "As are you, I think," Ethan smiled. "I'm still the family oddball who notices too much, but people seem less bothered by it these days." "Truth has that effect," Eleanor said. "Once it's been spoken, it changes everything, not just the present moment, but how we understand the past and approach the future." Across the garden, Caroline caught Ethan's eye and smiled warmly. Not the smile of a woman in love, but of one who recognized and valued an ally who had stood by her when it mattered most. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor asked, following his gaze. "Speaking up that day?" Ethan considered the question. "No. Even with all the chaos that followed, I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd stayed silent." He paused. "Sometimes the truth has to break things before they can be rebuilt properly." Eleanor patted his hand approvingly. "That, my dear boy, is wisdom." As the evening progressed, Caroline made her way to them, her steps light and unencumbered by others' expectations. "The guest of honor," Eleanor greeted her. "This celebration suits you much better than the last." Caroline smiled. "A 30th birthday among friends seems more meaningful than a wedding built on illusions." She turned to Ethan. "Dance with me, for old time's sake." "Trisham." As they moved toward the area where other couples were dancing to the small jazz ensemble, Ethan felt a sense of closure. The complicated feelings he had harbored for his cousin had evolved into something deeper, a friendship fortified by shared experience and mutual respect. In the warm glow of the lanterns, surrounded by genuine affection rather than social obligation, Caroline and Ethan continued their dance, not as lovers or even as cousins, but as two people who had discovered that truth, however painful in the moment of its revelation, was ultimately the only path to genuine fulfillment. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Caroline's journey through the maze of social expectations and hidden truths has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most courageous act is simply speaking the truth, even when everyone around us is committed to maintaining comfortable illusions. For more emotionally powerful narratives like this one, we've prepared a special playlist of equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of courage and authenticity, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the power of truth. We can't wait to see you in the comments section. What was your favorite moment in Caroline and Ethan's story? What would you have done in their situation? Join